sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? And he said,
Now here's a prophecy, my friends, that in the latter days there'll come such times as there had never been and never will be once again. It's in Matthew 24, and it's right now at the door of our
For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in many places.
Now here's another word of truth. There shall be wars and rumors too, and many earthquakes there will be. The time is so near, can't you see? It's in Matthew 24, and it's right now at the door of our lives. Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ. There is a way we can be saved before it gets too near the end. Accept the Lord into your hearts. There is no other way, my friends. It's in Matthew 24, and it's right now at the door of our lives.
Heaven and earth shall pass away, but these words will never pass away. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations. And then shall the end come.
Newswatch Magazine presents the analysis of world news in the light of Bible prophecy with David J. Smith.
When Jesus Christ finished his Olivet prophecy, he had his disciples with him, and he stated in Matthew 24, verse 42, that they should watch. And he had reference to those things that he had just discussed. So watching world events so that we would not be caught unawares as to when all of these things that are going to happen upon the earth. Then Jesus Christ in Ezekiel chapter 33 had inspired many, many centuries before that someone would come on the scene at a certain time and have to stand up and tell the people and witness to them and tell them that there is coming the kingdom of God and warn the people to turn from their sins. On CNN News on October 29th, 1999, they showed President Bill Clinton coming off a plane and said that he had been discussing with those representatives of the Middle East that they would have hammered out a final peace accord between the Arabs and the Jews by September of the year 2000. Now, it's very interesting because we are looking toward the year 2000 now, and many people think that that's the end of the century, but it's not. Until the year 2100 comes, then you're through with the end of this millennium, the 1,000 years. But scientists have run backwards in the moon phases so that they could try to find out if they're precise in our modern Roman calendar in which we use. And as they ran backwards, they found that they were missing 2 years and that we should be approaching, according to the Roman calendar, January 1st. It should be, instead of 2000, it should be 1998. If this is correct, it would give us just a little more time to see all the pieces fit together like a hand and a glove and Bible prophecy come to pass. However, it doesn't matter because it's all in God's timing anyway. Notice what an article said. Why should you get a chip implant? This was September 27th, 1999. How'd you like to avoid waiting in lines for the rest of your life? Breeze through everywhere you like to go, no matter what, like you owned the place. Watch lights snap on, doors open automatically, money pop out of ATMs as you approach. Never have to show an ID, buy a ticket, carry keys, never remember a password. You'd leave stores loaded with packages and waltz right past the cashier. You wouldn't have to carry a wallet ever. Family and friends could find you instantly in a crowd. There's only one catch. You'd need to have a tiny chip implanted into your body. No big deal. Just as Kevin Warwick, a British professor who had a silicon-based transponder surgically inserted into his forearm last year. Warwick's gizmo, a coil of wire and a few chips embedded in a small glass capsule about 1/10 of an inch wide and less than an inch long, generates a 64-bit number when zapped with a RF transmitter, and it lets him pass right through the line. It automatically deducts everything from his bank account. Exactly what we've been talking about for years and years. He went on in this particular article to say a lot of us carry similar mechanisms inside ID cards to open doors. They do it in the defense industry. But these can get lost, forgotten, stolen, or misused. The identical terminology I've been using since 1981 about the computer chips and the excuse they're going to use to put them on our body eventually, our right hand or our forehead. Then he says, and biometric devices like retinal scanners and fingerprint sensors are intrusive and imperfect. So they're saying that the perfect way would be to put this inside of your body so that you would be able to buy and sell and never have to slow down. It just takes it out of your bank account and puts it into the store's bank account. Then there's another article said cash and tax and carry tax. Dateline, Washington, D.C., October 27th, 1999. United States currency should include tracking devices that let the government tax private possession of dollar bills, a Federal Reserve officer says. Now remember who the Federal Reserve is. It's an organization that was attempted to be established since the earliest times of the United States, international bankers of the Illuminati working for world government. And one of the 10 planks to the Communist Manifesto was that they would have a central bank in every nation, and then a super central bank for the whole world through which these nations' banks would operate. So today they've already accomplished this with the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States, and also the International Monetary Fund through the United Nations Organization and the World Bank. Now he's saying the longer you hold currency without depositing it in a bank account, the less that cash will be worth. In other words, they'll tax you. Because what are some of the prophetic messages that I've been given, how they want to monitor everything that we do? They want to make it like a 1984 Big Brother society. And I thought it was very interesting when Bill Clinton was interviewed and about a particular question that he answered. He said, we don't want to have a 1984 Big Brother society, when the exact opposite is what he's working for as fast as he can. But anyway, he said the less cash will be worth, according to the proposal from Marvin Goodfriend, a senior vice president at the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, Virginia. In other words, greenbacks will get automatic expiration dates. The magnetic strip could visibly record when a bill was last withdrawn from the banking system. A carry tax could be deducted from each bill upon deposit according to how long the bill was in circulation. That way they will know how long you have money, how much money you have. And if you keep it and hoard it and keep it in your private home, as any good saver should do, at least put back some money for an emergency, then you will be penalized or taxed as a direct result of keeping this money. And they went on and said this would be like a hoarding tax to prevent people from hoarding. Well, if you look into all the documents of the Communist Manifesto and those who are working for world government, they say that nobody is to be rich. Nobody is to have savings. Everybody's to be equal the world over. So they can't have one person hoarding currency and somebody else in poverty. So they've got to have some way that will sound so good to bring all the currency to the surface. And they said this would also fight criminal activities, the mafia and so on. Because if they kept money out of banks, then the value would become zero after a certain period of time. What does this sound like to you? Does it sound like Revelation 13, verse 16 and 17, where it said, no man will be able to buy and sell except he that has the mark in the right hand or in the forehead? It doesn't matter what your status in life is. No matter what it is, whether you're rich, poor, or anything else, if they implement this, everybody on earth is going to have this numbering system placed inside of their body so that you can walk past the scanners at the grocery store. It automatically deducts your money. And the reason they want to do this, and they want to have a currency tax if you keep money out of circulation, is because they want all the money in the bank. So they can institute this instant transfer of funds, and you'll never need any currency, but it'll always be in a bank so they can instantly transfer your currency from any purchase which you make. But there are other things that are happening in the world today. The United Nations organization, and they have already denied wanting to be a world government. They've already denied wanting to come into the streets of the United States of America to occupy it. But the United Nations, according to this article of September 25th, 1999, it said, in a bid to curb civil wars, ethnic massacres, and terrorism, the United Nations Security Council on September 24th, 1999, discussed an initiative by the United Nations chief to implement greater gun control measures around the world. This means they want to control. And when you look into the final revolutionary program for the international communism, the final step is to confiscate all guns. So now not only the United States are they getting into the act of passing legislation to control guns, but now the United Nations is now making it a worldwide program. Notice what Bill Clinton says. The United Nations is not the only avenue for peacekeeping. This was the headline, September 21st, 1999. I'll quote, in a speech to the annual United Nations General Assembly, Clinton also appealed for an unrelenting battle against poverty. See, they're using poverty as the excuse to help people left behind in the global market. and announced a new United States effort to promote development of vaccines against diseases common in poor countries. Making his 7th speech to the United Nations, Clinton said the international community had to have a shared responsibility. What is the Communist Manifesto? It says you take away from the rich and you give it to the poor. You take away from the have countries and you give it to the have not countries. So Bill Clinton, every statement he makes, just like Tom DeLay said in the House of Representatives one time, everything he and his wife says, it sounds like they're communist, and they are. They're working for a communist one-world government through the United Nations organization. The President endorsed United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan's warning on Monday, this was in September, that countries cannot assume their national sovereignty will protect them from international intervention. Isn't that amazing? Because that's the very thing the United Nations said they were denying, was that they would ever intervene in a sovereign nation like the United States of America. And yet Bill Clinton didn't say they can intervene in any country in the world except the United States. It said any country, sovereign country. He went on to show that the White House aides said that Clinton still viewed the United Nations as the indispensable institution for conducting international affairs. Then it went on down in this particular article and quoted Mr. Clinton saying, in the real world, principles often collide and tough choices must be made. In other words, the tough choice of national sovereignty, our freedom, or the merging together with an international organization for world government. Then here's what Mr. Bill Clinton said. We must refuse to accept a future in which one part of humanity lives on the cutting edge of a new economy, while the other lives at the knife edge of survival. End of quote. So when you read the Communist Manifesto, and you read all the statements of Karl Marx, and he only wrote the final plan for the Illuminati, he basically plagiarized and wrote verbatim practically what Adam Weishaupt had already written in 1871 to 1876 before he started the modern day Illuminati. These are worshipers of Satan behind the scene. Revelation 13:2 says so, that this government that is going to rise is given power. It's a spiritual power, and it's from the dark forces, not the good side. They only camouflage their ultimate goal and purpose for mankind by good, smooth-sounding words. Notice what Kofi Annan vowed that the United Nations will do. I've reported this before, September 21st, 1999. Leaders of the United Nations warned at yesterday's opening of the UN General Assembly that national borders will no longer be a deterrent to justify humanitarian intervention. Traditional considerations of national sovereignty will no longer be taken into account, said Kofi Annan. So they are going to start going across national borders without notifying even the nation or having the nation to ask for help from the United Nations. In the charter right now, the participating member state must ask for the United Nations to bring in forces to help them. But now they're saying we're changing all of that. It's not going to be the same as it was before. There is a presidential power grab in the United States of America. United States Representative Ron Paul from Texas has made it very clear that President Bill Clinton is using executive orders to move the United States into a global police force with the United Nations organization. He's put out a letter that appeared on the internet October 26, 1999, in which he stated that Presidential Decision number 25, better known as PDD 25, takes the matter of United States troops in United Nations operations completely out of the hands of the Congress of the United States. And then Presidential Decision Directive number 60 replaces our once launch of nuclear weapons on warning that there were coming missiles at our country, and says we must absorb at least one nuclear strike before we would retaliate. Of course, he says in this letter that this Presidential Executive Order number 13,107 is used to implement all the treaties that he wants to merge us into the United Nations organization. And if something isn't done to stop it, the United States will have been a has-been country, just a province in a global government. Then, in order to carry out the United Nations' new proposal of bans on guns, gun confiscation, they're starting a tough new law in Maryland, says the Attorney General of that state. This was October 20th, 1999, page A01 of the Washington Post, in which they said that the Maryland Attorney General, Joseph Curran, is proposing a wide-ranging package of laws that would make the state's gun control regulations among the strictest in the nation. And the ultimate goal is a ban on handguns. So this tells me they're working their program right down the line in spite of what anyone tries to deny. And the United Nations press release trying to discredit our billboard campaign in Texas, asking the question, could Texas be occupied by the United Nations troops? Just won't work when all the statements and the documents and the legislation being passed in the United States by executive orders says the opposite. It says they have every plan in coming into America, into the streets of this country and occupying it. And that it is going to be a one-world government, not what the United Nations assistant to the Secretary General Kofi Annan replied. They wrote back and said the United Nations was never, ever intended to be a world government. When all you have to do is read their literature and you find out that's a lie. There's another article that appeared on the internet September 23rd, 1999, which is very important for us to understand as we watch world news, as Jesus Christ said, and keep ourselves informed as to the trends so that we can know when these things are about to occur. The article says, the title is, Panel Sees Danger Ahead for America. And it discusses over the next 25 years how the United States will increasingly be less secure internally because of terrorist attacks, forcing people to change their concepts of national security. In other words, instead of a free, independent, and sovereign nation, and we the people have certain unalienable rights guaranteed to us by the U.S. Constitution, they put out this report called United States Commission on National Security, 21st Century. And in this, here's what was stated. In February, Defense Secretary William Cohen even told the Senate Armed Services Committees that Americans might have to surrender some civil rights in order to gain more security in the fight against domestic terrorism. Why is there domestic terrorism? One of the reasons why there is domestic terrorism in America is because the CIA mind control program has mind control what they call sleepers. Individuals who go out into the regular workforce, they get their jobs or they create cults and have followings for them. And at a certain point in time, they have trigger mechanisms. And these people go berserk because they've been programmed and they create terrorism. And it is not the average people in America, but it is a CIA program. And we even interviewed one of the people who've escaped from that program and was deprogrammed, named Kathy O'Brien. He went on to say, this is Cohen, our Secretary of Defense. He said, that is going to put us on a collision course with rights of privacy. And it's something that democracies have got to come to grips with. How much we're going to demand of our intelligence agencies and how much we will be willing to give up as a way of intrusion into our lives. That is going to be a trade-off if we want security. That doesn't sound like just a statement to me. That sounds like a threat that we're going to either give in or else there will continue to be terrorism. Why is it that our government can tell us months in advance exactly what kind of flus and other type of bugs are going to come into the air, and they're going to be much worse than the ones the year before? How can they tell us these things? And then it happens every time. Somebody knows something, and our government is the one who is playing the game on the American people. Am I anti-government? Absolutely not. I'm for the government of the Constitution of the United States, the greatest government that physical human beings have ever put together, when God is not ruling them, and it gives those people self-rule within the constraints of the laws set down within that Constitution. But when people have usurped that Constitution and are building a driving force to fulfill Bible prophecy, I must tell you those things. You must be aware. There's a Mr. Greg Nogum, a Washington Legislative Counsel for the ACLU. Now, the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, was founded by a communist. However, every single lawyer there is not a communist. They are being used as dupes for many of their purposes. But sometimes they come out with some truth. Here's what he said, quote, "The Defense Authorization Bill promises more military involvement in civilian law enforcement." What did I just read? This bill that is being promoted by the government of the United States is going to promote military involvement in civilian law enforcement in America. He said, at virtually the same time that Congress is investigating the role of the military units at Waco, Texas in 1993. We're particularly concerned that the bill effectively removes any requirement that military units be relied on only in an emergency. There is a possibility of the military being used in a proper way in emergencies. But according to the Posse Comitatus Act, they cannot be used for law enforcement in America when there is no emergency. Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman James Warner, who was a Republican from Virginia, denied they were going to be used with the military and the civilian. He said there's no Posse Comitatus exception contained in this provision. The fact is, this provision specifically prohibits military personnel from engaging in search, seizure, arrest, or similar activities. Well, that's in the Posse Comitatus Act. But what if that act is now being changed by legislation? And that's what the ACLU, at least that particular lawyer and counselor, has stated. This was a 151-page report. I'll only mention one or two other things. In all cases, this commission that wrote this said, the changes ahead have the potential to undermine the authority of states. Did we get that? When they passed this legislation, all the authority within the governor of the state of Texas, the governor of Massachusetts, the governor of Virginia, all the state legislature, all authority of the states will be undermined. That means it will be a dictatorship from Washington, D.C. And here's what this man said. One of the panelists that wrote this 151-page report, his name is Wolfgang Rennecke. He said, the state system is wasting away. That tells it. You can't get simpler what they have planned for us. This is the commission that they're going to be enforcing. There is another article from the internet, September 22nd, 1999. And the title of it, Media Played Drum of Official Waco Dissent 3 years ago. And it shows in here that the media said that everybody agreed with the official investigation of Waco and that the Branch Davidians killed themselves. But the media did not tell the truth as usual, because in fact there was a 4-page dissenting opinion to the House August 2nd, 1996 report. It was entitled Investigation into the Activities of Federal Law Enforcement Agents Toward the Branch Davidians. And it showed that they sharply dissented and believed that it was a whitewash and the truth was never reached nor even hinted at. And this was authored by a Representative Stephen Schiff, Republican from New Mexico, who suddenly died. And then also Representative Bob Barr, Republican from Georgia, who's been under attacks. His character, because he is on to the federal government and he wants to put a stop to their activities. Here is a part of that statement within that 4-page dissent. Quote, unfortunately, we saw in the Waco tragedy the blurring of the lines between domestic law enforcement and military operations. Here it is once again. There was no emergency called. There was not the state of Texas that asked for the military to come in. And yet here was a blurring of the lines of law enforcement in America and military operations. I'll continue. An operation carried out pursuant to a strategy designed to demolish an enemy, utilizing tactics designed to cut off avenues of escape, drive an enemy out, and run roughshod over the niceties of caring for the rights of those involved. The protestations of the Attorney General to the contrary, that she authorized the injection of debilitating CS gas into closed interior quarters with no ventilation, where dozens of women and children were concentrated or out of the concern of the children, do not match the government's actions. In other words, she said, the Attorney General, they were trying to help the children, save the children, when they put in CS gas, which instantly, once you inhale it, immobilizes the bodies. It's a nerve gas, and the nervous system can no longer operate, and you collapse to the floor right where you stand. And the blurring of the lines of the military operations and the Posse Comitatus Act has never been identified. I will identify it for you right now. There were 15 Delta Force, Navy Delta Force individuals on the grounds. They were divided up into 2 subunits, 4 in one and 4 in another, as a backup group. The 4 who actually went into the compound after the nerve gas had been sprayed into it from approximately 6 o'clock a.m. until 10:30 in the morning. Everyone was immobilized. No one could stand. They were dropped onto the top of the building while the cameras were watching the tanks break in the side and the back of the building. They went from person to person and assassinated the men in that building. David Koresh was killed, shot right between the eyes, about an inch above the eyes, about 4 inches from the head, so said the pathologists and the ones who did the observing of the bodies. But all this was covered up. But 16 CIA agents have come forward to tell the truth on this information. And so there was a Delta Force who went in and assassinated the Branch Davidians. And then they set in the corners, 4 different corners, canisters of what is called Willie Peter, white phosphorus, which is the most ferociously burning type of fuel there is anywhere, with delayed timers so that they could get out of the building before 11:45, when all of a sudden the timers went off and the fire started, and anyone who was watching it just went up in 4 different segments in blazes all over the building. So it was an assassination by the CIA and the Delta forces. So the lines were blurred between law enforcement and military operations, because there were 7 men who were a part of a CIA mind control that would not perform their functions, and they took them out. Here is another part of this 4-page dissenting report. I seriously question the role of military officers being involved in strategic sessions as on-site observers. In other words, they didn't believe they were just there to be on-site observers. The presence of foreign military personnel and the use of military equipment such as armored vehicles. So all of this was at Waco, Texas, but they didn't tell anybody that on the media, did they? They simply said they altered 2 guns and there was a $200 fine for each of the guns, and that they did not report it and pay it. So the BATF came there to collect their money without a search warrant. And all of a sudden, they started shooting as they jumped out of the back of the truck, and the Branch Davidians opened the door to welcome them. And all of a sudden had to shut the door, and the door with the 13 bullet holes, proving that the bullets came from the outside in, disappeared and was never found. Unusual. I'll continue his quote about their concern about the violation of the Posse Comitatus Act and what it means to you and me and every other American. Contrary to the conclusion of the majority report, that's this commission that reviewed the Waco case in 1993, I am not convinced that the separation between the military operations and domestic law enforcement codified in the United States Code's Posse Comitatus provisions were not violated in Waco operations. So he said they were violated. He was not convinced they weren't violated. Then he went on to show, in a part of this article, in a part of this 4-page report, dissenting report, that there were actually FLIR. This is forward-looking infrared radar. The planes and the helicopters that were going over the top were taking pictures of the entire operation, which absolutely proved beyond a shadow of a doubt the FBI lied to us. They were shooting at the Branch Davidians from the outside in. Because on this last day, because the Branch Davidians couldn't shoot, they were immobilized with the CS gas. Then they went on down in this report and talked about the fire, how that they did not believe that the fires were set by the Branch Davidians inside, because the real hard evidence shows that it was altogether something different. And I've already reported what that difference is. Then the key thing is why you and I will never hear about this on the national media that is controlled by the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a part of the Illuminati, is that they accused this committee that was to investigate Waco with obstruction of justice and wanted to try every single one of them on the committee because they would not report the truth. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 4, it states very clearly that as this government rises and when it comes into absolute power, that no one will be able to make war against this beast. Revelation 13:1 shows the beast is going to rise. It's going to be the final beast, because it discusses also in Revelation 19 when Jesus Christ comes out of the heavens with the saints who had just been on the sea of glass and received their reward and their crowns, and where they would become kings and priests on this earth during his 1,000-year reign. And when we came out of the heavens behind Jesus Christ and attacked this end-time system, we would overthrow the beast and the false prophet discussed in Revelation 13. So the time setting for this rise of this government is at the close of the age. And here it's going to become so powerful that no man will be able to make war against it, or nation. And so here we see that the government of the United States is promoting the merging together of the military with the internal domestic police forces. which is illegal according to the Posse Comitatus Act. There's another article that should be of great interest to us. The title is "The Marines Land in Arizona." This was Wednesday, October 20th, 1999, to give you another example of what is really going on in the United States today and how they're preparing this nation for martial law. I'll quote, "Units from the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit based at Camp Pendleton, California, have landed in parts of Arizona to conduct urban assault training and to familiarize troops with a realistic urban combat environment," a Marine spokesman said. However, residents are being asked not to consider the armed presence of hundreds of troops an invasion or preparation for the implementation of a particular government policy over their city. Why would they have to tell them that? Are people in this country becoming aware and becoming very skeptical? I believe so. Rather, he said, the exercises underway through today are merely part of a continuing series of urban training drills designed to familiarize Marines and other U.S. troops with urban combat conditions. Of course they are. They have to know how to fight in urban combat conditions because they're going to be used in America. And I will show you exactly who's going to be used in just a moment, and exactly what they will look like when you see them, exactly what they will be driving up to your door and my door if God is not on our side and count us worthy to escape all of these things. And they will drive up into the doors of other people all over this land when the time comes to put down resistors to the New World Order. According to Captain Abraham, who was a spokesman for this exercise, the 300-plus force of Marines were training in the Arizona area in an effort to teach them combat skills in an environment that cannot be duplicated at a military training center. And then they said for security reasons, they were aimed at protecting civilians. And he did not provide the exact training locations, but he did actually confirm that Goodyear, Arizona was one of them that would have the mock assault on the city. In response to an earlier controversy regarding the command structure of these exercises, Abraham denied a locally published report. This was in a newspaper by a newspaper editor who actually went and talked with them personally. Abraham told the World Net Daily that a young reporter from the West Valley View newspaper in Litchfield Park, Arizona, might have misinterpreted information given to her by city council officials. He said that while the FBI was indeed on the scene, they were not in charge of the operation. What does that mean to us? They admitted the FBI and the military were both on the scene together. Why would they need to be there together if this was strictly a military operation? I think it's going to get interesting as we go on. Here's another article. New military unit for domestic employment. Domestic is internal. Secretary of Defense Cohen says America should welcome troops on home soil. There was a gentleman that most of us remember who are old enough. He was a Secretary of State under Richard Nixon. Then the Watergate tapes came out and Mr. Nixon resigned. And so the Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, who happened to be during World War II a double agent for the communists whose code name was Boer. He went before the House and the Senate and asked for a vote of confidence so that he could continue to run the country until the vice president, or they selected another president who became Gerald Ford, I believe it was. So anyway, this man said that the American people would never allow United Nations troops in the city of this country. But if there were some unknown element, either a real or an imaginary threat from outer space or from somewhere else, then America would welcome United Nations troops into our country. Here is a man 20 years later, the Secretary of Defense, saying the same thing, that we should welcome troops on our own home soil. I'll quote this article. Critics are denouncing recent congressional changes to the Posse Comitatus Act that will allow a broader use of United States military forces in a domestic law enforcement role, including a new unit for deployment in assisting civilian officers during terrorist attacks. If they're just going to use them in terrorist attacks, that's one thing. But what if that's only the cover to get your foot in the door? You know how it is. A salesman comes up, they used to say, and he gets his foot in the door, and then he gets the rest of his body through that little opening, and he's in there selling you. Well, that's exactly what they do. They have a little opening. Then they go take a larger step and a larger step. I'll continue the article. The new command, established October 7th, 1999 in Norfolk, Virginia, will call for the United States Joint Forces Command. That's what it's going to be called, Joint Forces Command. It replaces the former United States Atlantic Command. At a ceremony commemorating the new unit, Defense Secretary William Cohen told participants the American people shouldn't fear the potential of seeing United States military forces on the streets of U.S. cities. Interesting. I don't know why those old Newswatch magazines and tapes have said this since the early 1980s, that it's going to come, and nobody would believe me. And now our own Secretary of Defense is telling us, don't worry, you shouldn't be worried about it. We're the good guys. We're not working with the United Nations. We're not going to take over this country. The United Nations has already put out a 1.5-page rebuttal. We were never set up to be a world government. Don't you know that? I'll continue the article. The military must deal with the threats we're most likely to face, Cohen said, downplaying concerns about troops operating on home soil. The American people should not be concerned about it. They should welcome it. Exactly what Henry Kissinger said. The new command is designed to prepare United States troops to fight abroad or to respond if terrorists strike with nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons. What was on ABC's Nightline in 1999, night after night? Not when, but it's going to happen. Not if, but when it happens. Chemical, biologicals. And the United States eventually would have to call martial law. They would have to. And the troops would be in the streets. And they're preparing us for us through articles like this, but it'll never hit the front page. In opposing the measure, critics cite the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act, which prohibits federal troops from participating in domestic law enforcement activities under most circumstances. With the concern over domestic terrorism rising since the World Trade Center attack, and that has never been told, those men were trained by the CIA on how to explode the bombs. But nobody tells us that, do they? And numerous incidences of cyber attacks on U.S. defense and financial institutions. The Clinton administration has begun to relax some of those restrictions. The new measures would end the requirement for local law agencies to reimburse the federal government for any local use of military equipment, so they'll get it free. So they'll welcome them to come into the streets, as well as to enable the Department of Defense to deploy military troops in cases of anticipated attacks. Doesn't that open the door? Not an actual terrorist attack, but an anticipated attack. Do we believe this could happen in America? It already has once, at least, in Atlanta, Georgia. 40,000 military troops were in Atlanta, Georgia. David Koppel of the Independence Institute warned that the measure would, if passed, set a bad precedence for years to come. Since the Waco debacle in 1993, when federal law officers and military personnel assaulted a church community, resulting in the deaths of over 80 men, women, and children, Koppel said the federal government has been eroding the protections contained in the Posse Comitatus Act. And it continues. And now the Secretary of Defense has even endorsed it and is trying to tell the American people, don't you worry about it. Don't worry. He goes on so far in this article, this is Cohen, Secretary of Defense, to say the states will not have enough military equipment. So only the federal government and the military of that government has enough equipment to operate. If there is a poisoned environment or other types of contamination. And so they're setting the stage to allow military personnel to come into the streets of America. But once again, a man by the name of Gregory Nogem, I've mentioned him once before, of the ACLU, he doesn't like what he's seeing. He even brings up such nightmarish scenarios as the films, if any of you have seen them, Enemy of the State, The Siege, Conspiracy Theory. And he says it seems like all of this is happening right before our eyes. He said these military personnel that they're allowing and preparing for this type of internal command, they're trained to kill the enemy. And that is what he made very, very clear. Then he went on to say, besides questions about the Army's Delta Force role during the Waco siege, most recently in 1997, U.S. Marines assigned to assist United States Border Patrol killed an 18-year-old goat herder because they're trained to kill. Then the last statement of this article says, addressing the long-term ramifications of this change in military law enforcement policy, Nogem said, when the crisis hits, those with the biggest guns will subjugate everyone else. Why have we seen in recent times black helicopters? They've become more numerous. Brenda and I went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. We saw a black helicopter hanging from the roof. We saw displayed on a mannequin the entire gear that those who pilot the black helicopters wear. Black helmets. If they have goggles, they have black goggles with only the white piece that they see through. They had black jackets, black shirts underneath, black belts, black pants, black shoes, and the most sophisticated military weaponry that you could ever see anywhere. And at the end of that little piece of 45-minute video, it stated very clearly why these people were being trained at the 101st Airborne Division to put down resistors anywhere in the world. So if their goal is to put down resistors, now, military, just like the man from the ACLU said, Mr. Nogem, he said they're trained to kill. What happened in Waco, Texas? And now they've discovered the military was there. And the Delta Force participated. Those people are dead. Members of the Reno, Nevada SWAT team have been demonstrating of recent times some of their strategic techniques and their use to deliberately assault individuals, how they do it. Each one of these team members is dressed in completely black, and they carry the most sophisticated weaponry that you could find anywhere. This is Reno, Nevada. They have all black. They have two different types of gear for the headgear. One of them is sort of like a heavy ski mask with goggles on them. The other is actually a helmet type. Then you have black gloves, black jackets, black shirts, black pants. The entire attire that they wear would scare you to death if you ran into them any time of the year. Then they carry the most sophisticated weaponry, and they come out on what is called hasty and deliberate operations. You know what they do? They even wear cushioned boots to where you can't even hear them approach. Every single item they carry is of such that no matter how it moves, there are no squeaks, so that you can't hear them on their way coming up to you. They're now being used in various police operations all over the country. Not just Reno, Nevada, Modesto, California, but nearly every major city of any size is developing these SWAT teams in all black. If there's a call that comes out, in many cases, if they think that it is a very dangerous call, the regular police will come and coordinate the efforts to contain those that they're trying to apprehend. Then the SWAT team comes in because they are the trained killers. And according to information that's been put out on these SWAT teams, they will try to use efforts not to kill anyone to begin with, but then, if those efforts fail, they have every right, and they have been trained to take out anyone that is a resistor. This does not mean if the government is being taken over by the United Nations organization and just any resistor there. This means anyone, if they're suspected of being a drug pusher, there is no proof but suspicion, and if they resist, those people might die, as happened to one California rich man who knew nothing about it. And they broke into his home and killed him on the spot. And they couldn't find, he didn't even own a gun. So the SWAT teams are being prepared to work with the military. Modesto, California was the first city that began to use Brinks armored trucks. They would paint them all black and have the little name police right above the windshield on the front, and possibly the insignia of the police department which they represented on the side, Modesto, California. Those people who are a part of these newly devised SWAT teams to be used, they're trained by the military, and they're to be used as military units assisting the local police authorities. They wear all black. They may have an identification on them that says SWAT. They may not. It's according to the circumstance. They have various types of uniforms. And if you don't even know who they are when they're coming up and they just say police and you don't know it, they don't give you a warrant, you have every right to pull out a gun and defend yourself according to American law. But if you do, and they're a member of the SWAT team, you're the guilty one, not them. So it's becoming very exciting in America now just to retain our freedom. They say that these SWAT team members are specially sought out people. It's not your everyday policeman that can even qualify to be these SWAT members. Most of them are coming from retired military personnel. Therefore, they've already been trained in one area. Therefore, they have a great deal of expertise in handling of guns, in being trained with knives and survival. They actually go into places such as post offices, and they have their mock games like they're taking out people who are taking hostages in post offices. And it talks about how they have shoes where you cannot even hear them. They're so soft on the bottom, but they are still black with black socks. I wonder if they wear black underwear. I don't know. They didn't say that in all the books that I've been reading. But anyway, these SWAT members in Reno, Nevada, they don't even get any extra pay for being a SWAT member. But they are trained rigorously, and they're given personnel or physical fitness tests every month. They're giving combat shooting tests every month to make sure they're up to the standard of the SWAT teams. They must go by what they call departmental rules. But the interesting thing about all of this is that they're now using these Brinks trucks, and they move up the street behind the Brinks trucks because they're bulletproof. And once they get into position, then they start their charge toward the particular building where they're going to rescue someone. And then out in Modesto, California, they slipped, and they have now shown us the true intent of the SWAT teams. We'll have this on our internet site so that anybody can go and see it. But the Brinks trucks, all black, painted black, and have the Modesto, California police insignia on the side. These SWAT team members carry shields with the very words NATO police on them. NATO happens to be the subsidiary of the United Nations organization that is made up of France, Great Britain, the United States, Germany, and other European countries. And they've now expanded it to where some of those NATO countries are former communist countries. So that even communist countries, that's why they're being trained, the communist personnel that have come into America in this country, because they're members of NATO. But they're still communist. They have been trained in communism. They have been trained that the enemy of the United States are the communists, and that we're their enemies, and that the two cannot coexist together. So why are they training in America under NATO shields? They are training to eventually become a part of the world police force domestically in the United States of America. On October 26, 1999, Dateline, Washington, D.C., a UPI report, said Republican Kurt Weldon, or Representative Weldon, who is a Republican from Pennsylvania, said that Tuesday the Soviet Union may have hidden explosives, radio transmitters, and possibly nuclear weapons in the United States. He said they'd possibly hidden them during the Cold War for use in sabotage against the United States power systems and other key infrastructures. Now, what if suddenly, the year 2000, the electricity doesn't work? Would they be blamed for this? Or could it be simply that the electricity was not ready and the Y2K problem caused it to fail? He said two such other discoveries were found in Switzerland and Belgium. And even on the nightly news now, NBC, they admitted they had found a suitcase-sized bomb in America that had been stashed away. And of course, Mr. Weldon's big thing was that the President of the United States knew all this and has never even addressed it and never even brought it to the public's attention. Of course, we've known about it and reported about it because of the defectors who came into this country, high KGB agents and GRU agents, intelligence agents. And we've got books, Old Lies for New, or New Lies for Old, by Galitzin and so on, who told all of their strategy throughout the 80s and the 90s until finally we would disarm and they would continue to build their military. Is this true? Could it be happening? Could we, as a church group sitting here today, have the inside scoop that the rest of the nation will never know unless we sound the warning to tell them? And is it with accuracy? Everything I've been saying has been coming right off the newspapers, right off the internet. Notice, Clinton orders human experiments. October 22nd, 1999. Executive Order number 13,139 is requiring military personnel to receive experimental vaccines not approved by the Drug and Food Administration. If they don't take these experimental drugs, they will be court-martialed. This article shows that Executive Order 13,139 requires all 2.4 million United States troops to take a vaccination against anthrax, and it is not even approved. They don't even know if it works or if it gives you anthrax. As a result, there have been people, over 1,000 troops who refused, who are now waiting for trial. And they're going to be court-martialed and placed in prison. This is our president who has done this. What has he always done back in the 1969, right up into the early 70s when he was a Rhodes Scholar and a draft dodger over in England? What did he do? He called for total disarmament of the United States. He called for us to get out of the Vietnam conflict and totally disarm as a nation. And then he went behind the Iron Curtain and did business with the Russians. But nobody will tell us what business he did with them. And yet, he's now President of the United States. Disarmed already 60% of our military bases and manpower. And so the United States has become very weakened. Just like Manuelewski said, in the 1930s, at the Lenin School of Warfare in Moscow, they said that a certain time would come in history when they would continue to build militarily, but the United States, when they pretended weakness, they pretended to be friends again. And they did by tearing down the Berlin Wall. Then they said all of our satellite countries are free. We're just going to be a federation now. No, but nothing has changed. Anytime somebody tried to leave them, like Chechnya, they destroyed them. And so they're the same communist country and network of countries they've always been. But the mass media in America tells us communism is dead. They're no longer a threat to the United States. And Manuelewski said, when America believes this and swallows our great lie, they will disarm. And when they disarm, we will smash them with a clenched fist. In other words, militarily, they will take over the United States of America. Well, if anyone understands the background of the United Nations organization, that it was developed by Colonel Edward Mandell Marx, or Colonel Edward Mandell House, who was a Marxist. He tried to get the League of Nations after World War I set up. It failed. So he worked until he died in 1944, and others took his place. And they founded the United Nations in San Francisco in 1945. And every single member of the United States delegation from the Treasury and State Department were later found within 8 years to be communists. And they are the ones who wrote the charter to the United Nations. Molotov, representing Russia, Alger Hiss, imprisoned for smuggling our secrets to the communists. In prison, they wrote the charter. And so those who have looked at it said that the only thing it could do, since it was created by communists and it was built to become a communist world blueprint, so it can only build a one world communist government. But the key is, with our military now being given the license to operate with the local police, Are we becoming militarized just like the United Nations has called for? Yes, we are. We're becoming a police state in preparation for the time when world government is declared. But if this doesn't happen the way they want it to, and if the American people become alerted and there is resistance, what about the communist world? Are they still seeking to fulfill their pronouncements that they would build nuclear weapons, conventional weapons, while America disarms so that one day, if necessary, they would smash us with a clenched fist? Notice this article from the Washington Times, October 15th, 1999. This is not the 1930s. This is 1999. Quote, China is building up its missile forces in preparation for possible attacks against Taiwan and the United States if the U.S. military comes to the island's aid. The large number of regional offensive missile systems backed by space-based spying systems will be the cornerstone of the People's Liberation Army warfighting early in the 21st century, and a devastating weaponry of military utility, according to the Pentagon report. Beijing's drift toward a force dominated by offensive theater missiles. Not defensive, but offensive. Offensive is when you attack the other country. Could have significant implications for the regional stability, the report said. In the most likely scenario for their use, the People's Liberation Army's growing arsenal of highly accurate and lethal theater missiles and a preemptive doctrine could give Beijing a decisive edge in the future conflict with Taiwan. Preemptive, that means they strike first. Just like Russia has now changed their policy. Regarding United States involvement in a war between China and Taiwan, the report makes clear that Beijing won't hesitate to attack. The People's Liberation Army has indicated a willingness to use highly accurate short-range ballistic missiles, medium-range ballistic missiles, and land attack cruise missiles against United States assets, to include key bases in Japan and aircraft carriers operating in the Western Pacific. Then they went on to show that they are already preparing as many missiles as possible to take out all of our aircraft carriers. But what about Russia? Do they have any indication? Are they just a sleeping giant over there that nobody's awakened yet? October 12th, 1999. This is not the 1930s with Manuelewski's statement. October 12th, 1999. Headline, Russia updates military doctrine, sees new threats. Quote, Moscow. Russia has published a new draft military doctrine that retains the right to use nuclear weapons first. President Boris Yeltsin approved the last doctrine in 1993 after the military reluctantly put down a paramilitary revolt. It was never published in full, but excerpts on nuclear policy and intervention abroad caused a stir in the West at the time. And then it goes on to show that now they have completed their doctrine that they did not complete in 1993. And the article says at the core of the new doctrine is a concept of two opposing trends. Unipolar, meaning United States superpower dominion, and the opposite, multipolar, meaning implying many centers of influence, including Russia. They don't want to see the United States as the superpower dominating the whole world. Russia wants to have its say-so. So they stated that now, because the United States, because of the invasion of Kosovo, their troops were too close to the Russian border and its allies. So they have now come up with a doctrine where they will absolutely strike first if they see the United States as a threat. In Ezekiel chapter 38, here's what it says in the first few verses. Verse 1, And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Meshech is the ancient name for Moscow. Tubal is the ancient name for the modern day Tubalski. Gog and Magog, those two words in Hebrew mean Antichrist party. What is Russia and China? If you're caught being a Christian in those countries, you go to jail. They are an Antichrist party. And say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I'm against you, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn you back and put hooks into your jaws. I will bring you forth and all of your army. And it describes what was the military force of that day, not the modern jets, not the modern nuclear missiles and so on today. And he says he'll bring a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. So they're all going to be stockpiled with military equipment. And he names them in verse 5, Persia. You take a map of ancient Persia, lay it down right over Iran and Iraq, both Muslim countries supplied militarily by Russia, who has been trying to destroy little tiny Israel for a long time. Then it says Ethiopia, which was overthrown for the communists. And Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, runs terrorist training camps. At last count, there were 16 on the soil there. And all of them with shield and helmet. So they're all going to be militarily fortified. Gomer and all of his bands, the house of Gomer, Togomar, of the north countries and all of his bands. So all of those satellite countries around Russia called the Federation today. Notice what it says, verse 7. Be you prepared. Every one of these nations are going to be militarily prepared for an exact, precise moment in history. And it says, prepare for yourself. That's Russia, that's Gog and Magog, Russia and China, you and all of your company that are assembled unto you. And be you, Russia and China, a guard unto them. No nation that has ever been overthrown for communism has come out from under communism. Only one was allowed to emerge when they tore down the Berlin Wall as an overture of peace to fool the West. And that was to get rid of the East German burden because they were economically bankrupt. And they placed the nation's debts right on the backs of the West Germans who were affluent. Verse 8, let's see the time setting. After many days, you shall be visited. In the latter years you shall come into the land that is brought back from the sword and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel. Now, you have to understand, when you read the first 37 chapters of Ezekiel, you see that Jerusalem was the headquarters for the tribe of Judah. It was called the house of Judah, Judah and Benjamin. But the northern 10 tribes of Israel were taken by Sennacherib in 2 waves. And then finally they were deported out of their land in 718 to 721 BC. And they were sifted through the nations. They lost sight of the Sabbath day, so they didn't have the identifying sign that the tribe of Judah, known as Jews today partially, and their proselytes have today. And so they were sifted away from their northern homeland over into Western Europe and the United States of America. And they left a trail throughout the Bible. And when you put all the scriptures together, you see where they migrated. They even left marks of their naming, like the tribe of Dan. They had always had a tradition of going someplace and they'd change the name to Dan or Danube or Dan Niper or whatever in honor of their father. So you see trails all over Europe where the Danish people migrated across it, the Dnieper River, the Danube River. Then they landed in London, England. See, the Hebrew language only has consonants. You have to put a vowel in it to distinguish what it is. So you just put the word D in and look all over Edinburgh and all over the rest of the British Isles. The very word British, Brit, means covenant. Ish means man in Hebrew. Covenant man. And then the United States. The people from Western Europe and England came to the United States. We were brought out of the nations. And here we are. And who is it that is the avowed enemy of communism today? The United States of America. When Lenin, V.I. Lenin in 1921 laid down the final blueprint, he said, first we'll take Eastern Europe. They did it. The satellite countries have been in that orbit since World War II. Then they said, we'll take the masses of Asia. Then we'll surround the United States. It'll be the last bastion of capitalism. They're the target, the United States. And what does it say here? In the latter days. Who is it that Russia and China, the Antichrist spirit, is targeting? Israel, not Judah. Judah has their own homeland in the Middle East, but even though there's more Jews in New York City than there is in Israel. And they call themselves Israel, but you look throughout the Bible and they're called Judah. So they've got the wrong name over there. Legally, verse 8, after many days you shall be visited in the latter years. You shall come into the land brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, which has been always waste. Yes, there were Indian tribes here before we came and settled it. And manifest destiny took us all the way across from one sea to the other sea. But it is brought forth of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. The United States is the only nation, basically, that has not had a war on its soil by a foreigner because of our strategic land area. Verse 9, you shall ascend, this is Russia and China, and come like a storm. Why? Because it's going to be a surprise. We've been told by the media, communism is dead. You shall be like a cloud to cover the land, yes, with missiles. You and all your bands and many people with you. Thus says the Lord God, it shall also come to pass that at the same time things shall come into your mind, and you shall think an evil thought. Here's what they're going to think. You shall say, I'll go up to the land of unwalled villages. In other words, the United States does not have military fortifications the way they do in the Middle East. You look at Judah in the Middle East, they have bars on their doors, they have bars on their windows, and they have locks on them. They even carry guns on their sides to protect themselves against the Arabs and the Muslims over there. They're constantly at war. But in America, we've been at rest all of these years. And you shall say, I'll go up to the land of unwalled villages. I'll go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely. And you ask people in this country, not one person would ever think that there would be a war on American soil. Russia's never going to hurt us. China will never touch us. All of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. And the purpose? To take a spoil, to take a prey, to turn your hand upon the desolate place that's now inhabited, and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations, which have gotten cattle and goods. What is the nation on this earth that has the greatest amount of cattle than any other on the earth? The United States. It's second to India. And India just doesn't eat their cattle because they think it might be a relative reincarnated. But America's whole herd turns over every 5 years. So America, this is who Russia is coming after. Those who understand these things must make sure of one thing, that our lives are such that when these things begin to happen and we see the militarized police come into the streets of America just like the United Nations calls for, when we see the United States disarmed more and only this police force working with our local city policemen, when they become strong, then when we also see a continuing hostility between Russia, China, and the United States, then when we see the veto power taken away from the United States, and we will no longer be able to keep foreigners from the troops of America, then we're going to know that things are very near. And if Mr. Bill Clinton is correct, that by September of the year 2000, the final peace plan for the Middle East will have been enacted, wouldn't that be just close enough to what is called the Feast of Tabernacles of that year? And that's how God tells time through the moon phases. Then wouldn't it be possible that the 3.5-year period that we're looking forward to with great anxiousness, that is going to be called persecution, the church would then possibly flee? We're waiting with great anticipation because you see, Revelation 12, verse 13 to 17, it's very clear that people who believe in the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ, they are going to be listening. And all of those who have a heart to hear what is said, but not only just listen to a message so that you can put knowledge inside of your brain, but so that the knowledge, once you learn prophecy, then you learn the doctrines, the covenant of God, and that there is a law of obedience versus a spirit of disobedience in the world today. Even in the churches. And only those who pertain to the law of obedience and will live it from the heart are going to be considered by Jesus Christ to fly into the wilderness so they can be nourished for the last 3.5 years, protected. Brethren, I have spent all my energies, all my efforts to make sure that whoever is here at this church, whether it's 10 people, 50 people, or 1,000 people, those who have the right heart will at least be prepared where God can say, I will account you worthy to escape all of these things.